She leaned over and whispered something in French to my son, and they both laughed while staring at me. I smiled politely, pretending I didn't understand. But what I did next made her lose everything. "I'm so glad you're here. Stay with me until the end of this story, and please comment which country you're watching from so I can see how far my experience has traveled." At 70 years old, I thought I'd seen every shade of disrespect a person could show another. I was wrong. My name is Eleanor Hartfield, and 6 months ago, I watched my only son fall in love with a woman who would try to erase me from his life. Her name was Céline Beaumont, a 33-year-old corporate strategist from Quebec City who had waltzed into our world with her Chanel suits, architectural cheekbones, and an air of superiority that could freeze water. I should start by telling you about my son, Thomas. He's 38 now, a successful investment banker in Chicago who'd spent the last decade building his career. After his divorce 3 years ago, a quiet, mutual separation from a kind woman named Jennifer who decided she wanted different things in life, Thomas had thrown himself completely into his work. I'd worried about him during those years, living alone in his sterile downtown apartment, eating takeout at his desk, measuring his worth in quarterly bonuses and client acquisitions. Then he met Céline at a financial summit in Montreal. I remember the phone call vividly. It was a Tuesday evening in May, and I was tending to my tomato plants in the small garden behind my cottage in Riverside, a quiet suburb about 40 minutes from the city. Thomas called, and his voice had an energy I hadn't heard in years. "Mom, I met someone," he'd said, and I could hear the smile through the phone. "Her name is Céline. She's incredible. Brilliant, beautiful, sophisticated. She's done consulting work all over Europe. She speaks French, English, and Italian fluently. Mom, I think she might be the one." My heart had swelled with happiness for him. After years of loneliness following his divorce, my boy had finally found someone who made him feel alive again. "That's wonderful, sweetheart," I'd said, wiping dirt from my hands onto my gardening apron. "When do I get to meet her?" "Soon," he'd promised. "I want to make sure it's serious first." "But Mom, I really think you're going to love her." That conversation was 6 months ago. The meeting I'd anticipated with such hope had become something else entirely, a systematic campaign to push me out of my son's life. The first meeting. I first met Céline Beaumont on a sunny afternoon in June. Thomas had invited me to brunch at Marcello's, an upscale Italian restaurant downtown. I'd dressed carefully that day, a floral dress I'd bought especially for the occasion, my good pearl necklace that had belonged to my mother, and sensible heels that I could actually walk in. When I arrived at the restaurant, I spotted them immediately at a corner table near the window. Thomas stood up and waved, his face bright with happiness. The woman beside him remained seated, watching me approach with an expression I couldn't quite read. Céline Beaumont was stunning in the way that made other women feel instantly inadequate. She had that effortless French elegance, dark hair cut in a sleek bob, perfect posture, wearing a simple black dress that probably cost more than my monthly pension. Her makeup was minimal but flawless, and when she extended her hand to shake mine, I noticed her manicure was impeccable. "Mrs. Hartfield," she said, her accent thick and deliberate. "Thomas has told me so much about you." "Please, call me Eleanor," I said warmly, taking her hand. Her grip was firm but brief, and she withdrew her hand quickly, as if touching me might be contagious. "Eleanor," she repeated, making my name sound somehow quaint and old-fashioned. What a charming name. Very traditional. We sat down, and I tried to engage her in conversation. I asked about her work, her family, how she and Thomas had met. She answered politely but with minimal detail, always steering the conversation back to herself, her time in Paris, her impressive client list, the important people she knew. Thomas watched her with adoring eyes, hanging on her every word. I recognized that look. I'd seen it before, during his first marriage, before the relationship had settled into comfortable familiarity. This was the intoxication phase, where everything the beloved said seemed profound and fascinating. But I also noticed something else. The way Céline's eyes would occasionally flick toward me with thinly veiled assessment. The subtle way she'd correct Thomas when he talked about his childhood, as if his memories of our life together weren't sophisticated enough for the story she wanted to tell. The way she'd touch his arm possessively whenever he turned his attention to me. "Your mother is sweet," she said to Thomas at one point, as if I weren't sitting right there. Very simple and down to earth. Simple. There was that word that would come to haunt me. The brunch ended with promises to meet again soon, but I left feeling unsettled. Something about Céline set off warning bells in my mind, though I couldn't articulate exactly what it was. Maybe it was the way she looked at me, like I was an obstacle to be managed rather than a person to be known. The engagement. 2 months later, in August, Thomas called to tell me they were engaged. He was elated, talking rapidly about how he'd proposed at sunset on a beach in the Hamptons, how Céline had cried happy tears, how they'd already started planning a spring wedding. "I'm so happy for you, sweetheart," I said, and I meant it. Despite my reservations about Céline, I wanted my son to be happy. I wanted to believe that my discomfort came from the natural adjustment of sharing him with someone new, not from any real cause for concern. "We want to have an engagement party next month," Thomas continued. "Nothing too big, just close friends and family. Will you come, Mom?" "Of course I'll be there. I wouldn't miss it for the world." The engagement party was held at Céline's apartment, the penthouse she'd been renting in one of Chicago's most exclusive buildings. I'd never been inside before, and when I arrived, I was overwhelmed by the sheer opulence of it. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, marble floors, modern art that probably cost more than my entire house, furniture that looked more like sculptures than things you'd actually sit on. Thomas had moved in with her by then, giving up his own apartment. When I asked if he was sure about the decision, he'd laughed and said, "Mom, why would I keep paying rent on my place when Céline has all this space?" The party was full of people I didn't know, Céline's colleagues, her friends from the consulting world, wealthy clients, and business partners. I knew exactly 3 people there, Thomas, his childhood friend Marcus, and my sister Dorothy, who'd driven up from Springfield to support me. I spent most of the evening feeling invisible. Céline was in her element, floating from group to group in a stunning emerald cocktail dress, speaking a mixture of English and French, laughing at jokes I didn't understand. Thomas stayed close to her side, playing the role of devoted fiancé, introducing her to people as if she were a rare treasure he'd discovered. Dorothy and I stood near the catering table, making small talk with Marcus, who seemed as uncomfortable as we were in this glossy, sophisticated crowd. "She's something else, isn't she?" Dorothy whispered to me during a quiet moment. "She certainly is," I replied, watching Céline air kiss a woman in a designer suit. "Do you like her?" I hesitated. "I want to. For Thomas's sake." Dorothy gave me a knowing look. My sister had always been able to read me better than anyone. "But you don't." "I don't know her well enough yet," I said carefully. "Give it time." But time only made things worse. The gradual erosion. Over the following months, I watched my relationship with Thomas slowly disintegrate. It started with small things. Phone calls that used to happen weekly became bi-weekly, then monthly. When we did talk, Thomas seemed distracted, often cutting conversations short because Céline needed him for something. Our Sunday lunches, a tradition we'd maintained even after his divorce, became increasingly rare. Thomas would cancel at the last minute, explaining that Céline had made other plans he'd forgotten about. When we did manage to meet, Céline often came along, dominating the conversation and checking her phone constantly as if she had more important places to be. I tried to be understanding. I remembered being young and in love, how the rest of the world faded when you were with someone new. I told myself this was normal, that Thomas would find his balance eventually. But then came the holidays. Thanksgiving had always been our special time. For 38 years, Thomas had come to my house for Thanksgiving dinner. It was our tradition, just the 2 of us after his father passed away when Thomas was 12, and later including his ex-wife Jennifer, who had always been gracious and kind. I'd make turkey with my mother's recipe, sweet potato casserole, cranberry sauce from scratch, and Thomas's favorite pumpkin pie. 2 weeks before Thanksgiving, Thomas called. "Mom, about Thanksgiving," he started, and I already knew what was coming. Celine's family is flying in from Quebec. Her parents, her sister, her nephew. She really wants to host them at our place, do a proper French-Canadian Thanksgiving. She's already hired caterers and everything. Our place. Not her place anymore. Ours. Of course, I said, trying to keep the disappointment out of my voice. You should be with her family. I understand. You could come, he offered, but I could hear the lack of enthusiasm in his voice. Céline said you're welcome to join us. I imagined sitting at their table, surrounded by Celine's family speaking rapid French, feeling like an outsider at what had always been my holiday with my son. That's kind of her, I said, but I don't want to intrude on her family time. Dorothy has been asking me to come to Springfield. Maybe I'll do that. Are you sure, Mom? I'm sure, sweetheart. You have a wonderful time. I spent Thanksgiving with Dorothy and her husband Gerald, and it was lovely. But it wasn't the same. For the first time in 38 years, I didn't spend Thanksgiving with my son, and the absence felt like a physical ache. Christmas was worse. Thomas and Céline went to Quebec City to spend the holidays with her family. They were gone for 10 days. Thomas called me on Christmas morning, a brief conversation where I could hear Celine's relatives laughing and talking in the background, making me feel even more alone in my quiet cottage with only my cat Whiskers for company. By the time February arrived, I'd seen my son exactly 3 times since Thanksgiving. Our relationship had been reduced to occasional phone calls and the rare lunch where Céline would come along and spend the entire time on her phone or making subtle comments about how quaint my stories were, how simple my life seemed compared to their busy, important existence in the city. I tried talking to Thomas about it once, gently suggesting that we'd lost our connection. He'd been defensive immediately. Mom, I'm building a life with Céline, he'd said. You need to understand that things are different now. I can't keep living like I'm still 25 with nothing but time for Sunday lunches and long phone calls. The criticism stung. I'd never demanded endless time with him. I'd only wanted to remain a part of his life. But I backed off, not wanting to be the clingy mother, the burden, the obligation. I told myself I was being oversensitive, that I needed to adjust to this new reality where my son's life had expanded beyond our small circle. I had no idea how much worse things were about to get. The dinner invitation. The dinner invitation came on a Tuesday afternoon in early November, almost exactly a year after Thomas had first told me about Céline. I was in my sewing room, working on a quilt for the church charity drive, when my phone rang. Mom, it's Thomas. Sweetheart, how are you? I haven't heard from you in a couple of weeks. I know, I'm sorry. Work has been insane. But listen, Céline and I want to have you over for dinner this Friday. She specifically asked me to invite you. She feels bad that we haven't spent much time together lately, and she wants to make more of an effort. My heart lifted despite my better judgment. Maybe I'd been wrong about Céline. Maybe she was finally ready to build a real relationship with me. That's wonderful, Thomas. I'd love to come. What can I bring? Just yourself, Mom. Celine's got everything planned. But actually, there is something you could bring. Would you mind making your apple tart? Celine's never tried it, and I told her it was the best dessert in the world. I think she wants to see what all the fuss is about. I smiled, feeling a warmth spread through my chest. Thomas had loved my apple tart since he was a little boy. It was one of the few recipes I'd perfected over the years, something I'd learned from my grandmother who'd immigrated from England. Of course I can make it. I'll prepare it fresh that afternoon. Thanks, Mom. Friday at 6:30. And Mom? Dress nice. Celine's ordered from some fancy French restaurant. She's going all out. I spent the next 3 days with a flutter of nervous anticipation in my stomach. I went through my closet multiple times, trying to find something that would be appropriate for what sounded like an elegant dinner. Most of my wardrobe was practical, comfortable slacks and sweaters from my quiet life in Riverside, church dresses that were years out of date, gardening clothes. Finally, I drove to the department store in the city and bought a new outfit, a navy blue blouse and gray slacks that the saleswoman assured me were current and sophisticated. They cost more than I usually spent on clothes, but this felt important. This felt like a chance to reset my relationship with Céline, to show her I could fit into her world. Friday afternoon, I made the apple tart with extra care, using the best ingredients I could find. I cut the apples precisely, arranged them in overlapping circles just the way my grandmother had taught me, brushed them with apricot glaze until they shone. When it came out of the oven, golden and fragrant, I felt proud. This was something I could offer, not sophistication or wealth or worldly experience, but this small thing made with love and skill. Arrival. I arrived at their building at exactly 6:30 p.m., the apple tart carefully balanced in a carrier in one hand, my purse in the other. The November evening was cold, and I was grateful to step into the warmth of the lobby. The doorman, a kind older man named Robert who always remembered me, smiled warmly. "Good evening, Mrs. Hartfield. Here to see Mr. Thomas?" "Yes, they're expecting me for dinner." "He's lucky to have such a devoted mother," Robert said, pressing the elevator button for me. "Not many sons get homemade desserts these days." I rode the elevator to the 23rd floor, watching the numbers climb, trying to calm my nerves. This was just dinner with my son and his fiancée. There was no reason to be anxious. But when the elevator doors opened and I walked down the hushed, carpeted hallway to their door, I felt that same unease I'd experienced during our first brunch together. Something I couldn't name, couldn't define, but could definitely feel. I knocked on the door, and moments later, Céline answered. She was dressed impeccably, as always, a cream silk blouse that probably cost more than my new outfit, tailored black pants that hugged her slender frame perfectly, and heels that added 3 inches to her height. Her dark hair was pulled back in a sleek chignon, not a strand out of place, and her makeup was flawless. She looked like she'd stepped out of a fashion magazine. Next to her, in my department store slacks and blouse, I felt like someone's frumpy aunt who'd gotten lost on the way to a church potluck. "Eleanor," she said, her eyes traveling slowly from my face down to my sensible flats and back up again. "You're precisely on time." "How, punctual?" The way she said, punctual, made it sound like an insult, as if being on time was somehow gauche and unsophisticated. "I hope I'm not too early," I said, stepping inside when she moved aside just barely enough to let me pass. No. 6:30 is exactly right." She glanced at the carrier in my hands. "What do you have there?" "The apple tart Thomas asked me to make," I said, trying to inject warmth into my voice. "It's fresh from this afternoon." Celine's perfectly shaped eyebrows rose slightly. "Ah, yes. The famous apple tart. Thomas has talked about it endlessly." She took the carrier from me with the tips of her fingers, as if it might contaminate her. "How rustic." She led me into the apartment, and I was once again struck by how immaculate everything was. The white furniture gleamed under expensive lighting. Fresh white orchids sat in crystal vases on the side tables. Abstract art hung on the walls, pieces that probably had pretentious titles and eye-watering price tags. Everything looked like a display in an upscale furniture showroom, beautiful but cold, expensive but devoid of any real warmth or personality. "You can hang your coat there," Céline said, gesturing vaguely toward the closet. She didn't offer to help, just stood watching me struggle out of my winter coat while still holding my purse. I hung up my coat and followed her into the living area. The dining table was set elaborately with white china that had delicate gold trim, crystal glasses that caught the light, and fresh flowers arranged in the center. Everything was perfect, positioned with mathematical precision. "Thomas is just finishing a call in the study," Céline said, gesturing toward one of the closed doors off the main room. "He shouldn't be more than a few minutes. You can wait here. Would you like something to drink? Water? Wine?" "Water would be lovely, thank you." She disappeared into the kitchen, and I stood awkwardly in the middle of their perfect living room, afraid to sit on the white furniture, afraid to touch anything. I felt like an intruder in a museum after hours. Céline returned with a glass of water, not in one of the crystal glasses from the table, I noticed, but in a plain tumbler that looked like it came from a completely different set. Here you are, she said, handing it to me. Then, as if reading my thoughts, she added, the good glasses are reserved for dinner service. I'm sure you understand. I took the glass and perched carefully on the edge of the white sofa, feeling the expensive leather beneath me and praying I wouldn't spill water on it. Your home is beautiful, I said, because it seemed like something I should say, even though the beauty felt sterile and unwelcoming. Thank you, Céline said, settling gracefully into the chair across from me. It's taken quite a bit of work to make Thomas understand proper aesthetics. When I met him, his apartment looked like a college dormitory. No sense of style whatsoever. She laughed, a tinkling sound that seemed practiced. But he's learning. Slowly. I wanted to defend Thomas, to say that his previous apartment had been comfortable and reflected his personality, but I kept silent. This was his home now, his life, his choice. We sat in uncomfortable silence for a moment. Céline checked her phone, scrolled through something, then looked back at me with an expression that suggested she was making an effort to be polite to someone beneath her station. So, Eleanor, she said, Thomas tells me you've lived in that little cottage in Riverside for quite some time. 25 years, I said. Since my husband passed away. How quaint. It must be so peaceful out there in the suburbs. Nothing to do, nowhere to go. Very simple. There was that word again. Simple. I like it, I said quietly. I have my garden, my church, my book club. I keep busy. I'm sure you do. Céline's smile didn't reach her eyes. Though I can't imagine being satisfied with such a limited existence. Some people are content with small lives, I suppose. The criticism was subtle but unmistakable. Before I could respond, Thomas emerged from his study, his face lighting up when he saw me. Mom. He crossed the room quickly and wrapped me in a tight hug. For a moment, I felt like I had my son back, the boy who used to run to me after school, who told me everything, who valued my opinion and presence in his life. Hi, sweetheart, I said, holding him close. It's so good to see you. You too, Mom. I'm sorry I've been so busy lately. Things at work have been crazy. I understand, darling. You're doing important work. Céline stood up smoothly. Shall we start dinner, Sherry? The food arrived 15 minutes ago, and French cuisine is best served at the proper temperature. We moved to the dining table, and that's when I noticed the place settings more carefully. Thomas and Céline had matching plates, beautiful bone china with delicate gold filigree around the edges. My plate was different. It was nice, certainly, but clearly from a different set. Simpler. Plainer. Céline noticed me looking. I hope you don't mind, Eleanor, she said sweetly. We only have 2 of the good plates from our set. They're from Limoges, very exclusive, quite expensive. The third one in the set broke last month, and it takes ages to get replacements shipped from France. That plate should be perfectly adequate for you, though. Thomas shifted uncomfortably. Céline, maybe we should just use the regular plates for everyone. Don't be silly, Sherry, she cut him off smoothly. Your mother won't mind. She's not pretentious about these things, are you, Eleanor? Of course not, I said quietly, even though the message was clear. I wasn't important enough for the good china. The food was exquisite, I'll give Céline that. Coco vin that melted in your mouth, perfectly seasoned ratatouille, duck confit with a cherry reduction that probably cost more than I spent on groceries in a month. Everything was plated beautifully, like something you'd see in a food magazine. But I could barely taste any of it. Because that's when the French whispers began. The whispers begin. We'd only been eating for about 15 minutes when Céline leaned toward Thomas and said something in rapid French, her voice low and intimate. I watched Thomas's eyes widen slightly before he glanced at me, then quickly away. He responded to her, also in French, his voice uncomfortable. They both smiled, those tight, secretive smiles that made it abundantly clear they were sharing something at my expense. Is everything all right? I asked, keeping my voice neutral. Oh, yes, Céline said brightly, turning those cold eyes on me. I was just telling Thomas how charming your outfit is. Very practical. The word practical landed like a small knife between my ribs. I forced a smile. Thank you, dear. Dinner continued, and so did the whispers. Every few minutes, Céline would lean over and murmur something to Thomas in French. Sometimes he would respond. Sometimes he would just look uncomfortable and try to change the subject back to English. But he never stopped her. I knew exactly what was happening. I understood every single word. But I kept my expression pleasant and vacant, pretending I had no idea what they were saying. Cette robe est terrible. On dirait tu elle acquitté dans un friperie. That dress is terrible. It looks like she bought it at a thrift store. Thomas shifted in his seat, said nothing. Regarde comment elle tient sa fourchette. Aucune élégance. Look how she holds her fork. No elegance at all. I continued eating, cutting my duck carefully, chewing slowly. Je ne comprends pas comment tu peux venir de quelqu'un comme elle. Tu es tellement plus raffin maintenant. I don't understand how you can come from someone like her. You're so much more refined now. That one made my chest tighten, but I kept my face neutral. The comments grew bolder as Céline became more confident that I didn't understand. She began to speak more loudly, barely bothering to lower her voice. Ta mère est pathétique avec sa petite tarte maison. Comme si pouvait comparer à la vraie pâtisserie française. Your mother is pathetic with her little homemade tart. As if it could compare to real French pastry. Elle porte les mêmes bijoux bon marqués à chaque fois. Ces pearls sont probablement fausses. She wears the same cheap jewelry every time. Those pearls are probably fake. My grandmother's pearls. The ones she'd brought with her from England. The ones I'd treasured for 40 years. I took a sip of water from my plain glass and said nothing. Céline, can we talk about something else? Thomas said finally, switching to English, clearly uncomfortable. Of course, Sherry, she said sweetly, also switching to English. Then, looking at me with false warmth, Eleanor, tell us about your week. What exciting things have you been doing in Riverside? The condescension in her voice was unmistakable, but I answered politely, telling them about my volunteer work at the community garden, about the quilt I was making for charity, about my book club's discussion of a novel we'd all enjoyed. Céline listened with that same patient expression you might use with a small child telling you about their finger painting. How wonderful that you have hobbies to fill your time, she said when I finished. It must be so important to stay busy when you don't have a real purpose anymore. Thomas frowned. Mom has plenty of purpose. Of course she does, Céline interrupted smoothly. I didn't mean to suggest otherwise. I just meant that at her age, without a career or much of a social life, it's good that she has her little projects. Little projects. My volunteer work that fed hungry families. My quilts that kept homeless people warm. My book club that had been meeting for 15 years and had become my closest friends. All reduced to little projects by this woman who'd known me for less than a year. We finished the main course, and Thomas began clearing plates. Céline immediately stood up, touching his arm. Sherry, could you help me bring out dessert? I want to plate your mother's tart alongside the crème brûlée I ordered from Maison Pierre. They disappeared into the kitchen, and I sat alone at the table, my hands folded in my lap, listening to their voices drift from the other room. Elle est tellement ennuyeuse, Thomas. Tout la soirée, elle n'a parlé que de son jardin et de ses livres. She's so boring, Thomas. All evening, she's only talked about her garden and her books. Céline, SLTE plate. C'est ma mère. Céline, please. She's my mother. Exactement. C'est ta mère. Passé. Tu es un vrai vie maintenant avec moi. Quand vas-tu comprendre tu elle fait plus partie de ton avenir? Exactly. She's your mother. Past tense. You have a real life now with me. When are you going to understand that she's not part of your future anymore? I sat very still, feeling each word like a physical blow. But my face remained calm, pleasant, uncomprehending. They returned with dessert, my apple tart cut into small pieces and arranged on plates alongside elegant crème brûlée in individual ramekins. Céline had positioned things so that the tart looked homely and plain next to the professional French dessert. I thought we could compare, Céline said with a smile. Traditional home baking versus authentic French pâtisserie. We ate both desserts in silence. My apple tart was good. I knew it was good because I'd been making it for 40 years and it had never failed. But next to Céline's expensive crème brûlée with its perfect caramelized sugar and silky custard, it did look rustic and simple. Both delicious, Thomas said loyally, but I could hear the forced enthusiasm in his voice. Céline said noncommittally. Then, turning to Thomas, she spoke in French again. Au moins nous pouvons dire que nous avons essayé cuisine. Maintenant tu ne pourras plus insister pour que j'ai goût aussi. At least we can say we tried her cooking. Now you can't keep insisting I taste it. After dessert, Thomas excused himself to take a phone call from a client in Singapore. The moment he left the room, Céline's demeanor changed completely. The false sweetness disappeared, replaced by something cold and calculating. Eleanor, she said, standing up and beginning to stack the dessert plates. Since you're here, would you mind helping with the dishes? The cleaning service doesn't come until tomorrow, and I just had my nails done. She held up her hands, displaying a fresh French manicure. I stared at her, feeling the full weight of the evening pressing down on me. I thought maybe Thomas could help, I said carefully. Céline laughed, a harsh sound completely different from her earlier tinkling laugh. Thomas? He has important work to do. Besides, you're his mother. Shouldn't you want to be helpful? Or is washing a few dishes too much to ask? The kitchen felt smaller than it should have as I stood at their professional-grade sink, washing their expensive French china by hand while they sat in the living room. I could hear them talking, Céline's voice drifting clearly through the open space of their modern apartment. Ta mère est tellement désespérée pour ton attention, Thomas. C'est embarrassant de la voir essayer si fort. Your mother is so desperate for your attention, Thomas. It's embarrassing to watch her try so hard. And then Thomas's response, weak and guilt-ridden, Céline, silte plate, c'est difficile pour elle. Céline, please, it's hard for her. Difficile pour elle? Et pour moi? Tu crois que c'est facile d'avoir cette vieille femme qui s'accroche à toi comme si tu étais encore un enfant? Ils temps tu elle comprenne que tu ne lui appartiens plus. Hard for her? What about me? You think it's easy having this old woman clinging to you like you're still a child? It's time she understands you don't belong to her anymore. I stood there at the sink, my hands in soapy water, staring at my reflection in the dark kitchen window. I looked old. I felt old. Every one of my 70 years pressed down on me like a physical weight. But beneath the hurt, beneath the humiliation, something else was stirring. Something harder. Something colder. Because Céline Beaumont had made a fatal miscalculation. She'd assumed that a 70-year-old woman from Riverside couldn't possibly understand French. She'd assumed I was exactly what I appeared to be, simple, limited, intellectually inferior. She had no idea who she was really dealing with. I finished the dishes, dried my hands on a towel that probably cost more than my weekly grocery bill, and walked back into the living room. Céline was curled up against Thomas on that white sofa, looking like a cat who'd just caught a particularly satisfying mouse. All done? She asked brightly, her false sweetness back in place. You're so helpful, Eleanor. Thomas is fortunate to have such an accommodating mother. I picked up my purse and coat. I should be going. It's getting late, and I have a long drive back to Riverside. Thomas stood up quickly. Mom, let me drive you. No need, I said, forcing a smile that probably looked more like a grimace. I drove myself here. I'll be fine. As I reached for the door handle, Céline called out one final comment in French, not even bothering to whisper anymore. Ne reviens pas trop souvent, vieille femme. Nous préférons notre vie sans toi ici. Don't come back too often, old woman. We prefer our life without you here. I paused at the door, my hand on the handle, feeling the words settle into my bones. Then I turned around and looked directly at Céline, my face still pleasant and calm. In perfect English, I said, "Thank you so much for a lovely evening. The dinner was exquisite. You have excellent taste." Céline smiled, satisfied. "It was my pleasure, Eleanor. We should do this again sometime." "Yes," I said quietly. "We should." I walked to the elevator with my head held high, my shoulders back, my dignity intact despite everything. But the moment the elevator doors closed and I was alone, the tears finally came. I cried all the way down 23 floors. I cried in the lobby, quickly wiping my eyes before Robert the doorman could see. I cried in my car for 10 minutes before I could even start the engine. But by the time I pulled out of the parking garage and onto the street, heading toward the highway that would take me home to Riverside, something had changed. The tears had stopped. And in their place was something I hadn't felt in a very long time, pure, crystalline rage. Because Céline Beaumont thought I was simple. She thought I was ignorant. She thought I was just another OL. The night after that dinner, I didn't sleep. I lay in my bed in my small cottage in Riverside, staring at the ceiling while my cat Whiskers purred softly beside me, completely oblivious to the storm raging in my mind. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard Céline's voice speaking in French, dripping with contempt and cruelty. I saw Thomas's face, conflicted and uncomfortable but ultimately silent, choosing his fiancée over his own mother. I felt the weight of those dishes in my hands, the humiliation of being treated like hired help in my own son's home. But more than anything, I replayed that final comment she'd made as I was leaving, "Don't come back too often, old woman. We prefer our life without you here." At around 3 in the morning, I got up and made myself tea. I sat at my kitchen table in the dark, the only light coming from the street lamp outside my window, and forced myself to think clearly instead of emotionally. What exactly had happened tonight? Céline had insulted me repeatedly in French, believing I couldn't understand. She'd treated me like a servant. She'd made it clear she wanted me out of Thomas's life. And my son, my beloved son whom I'd raised alone after his father died, whom I'd sacrificed everything for, had let it happen. The question wasn't whether I should confront them. The question was how. I could call Thomas in the morning and tell him I'd understood every word Céline said. I could demand an apology. I could threaten to boycott their wedding unless things changed. But as I sipped my tea and watched the first hints of dawn creep across the sky, I realized that a direct confrontation wouldn't work. Thomas was already choosing Céline over me. If I complained, I'd just be confirming everything she'd told him, that I was clingy, desperate for attention, unable to accept that he'd moved on with his life. No, I needed a different approach. I needed to understand what was really happening in Thomas's life, what hold Céline truly had over him, whether there was any way to salvage our relationship or whether I'd already lost my son completely. By the time the sun rose on Saturday morning, I'd made a decision. I was going to do something I'd never done before, something that went against every principle I'd raised Thomas with. I was going to investigate Céline Beaumont. Saturday morning. I started where everyone starts these days, the internet. I made fresh coffee, opened my laptop at the kitchen table, and began searching for everything I could find about Céline Beaumont. Her LinkedIn profile appeared first. It was impressive, I had to admit. She'd graduated from McGill University with a degree in business administration, then earned an MBA from HEC Montreal, one of the top business schools in Canada. She'd worked for several prestigious consulting firms, most recently as a senior strategy consultant at Pinnacle Advisory Group in Chicago. Her professional photo showed her in a crisp business suit, her expression confident and polished. The kind of woman who looked like she could walk into any boardroom and command respect. I scrolled through her work history, her skills, her recommendations from colleagues. Everything looked legitimate and impressive. Whatever else Céline was, she was undeniably accomplished in her career. But then I started looking deeper. Her Facebook profile was mostly private, but I could see her profile pictures going back several years. I noticed something odd. In photos from 3 years ago, she appeared with a different man, handsome, well-dressed, posing with her at what looked like expensive restaurants and vacation destinations. The photos stopped abruptly about 2 years ago. I searched for the man's name, which I found tagged in several of the older photos, Philippe Marchand. More searching revealed that Philippe Marchand was a successful real estate developer in Montreal, 15 years older than Céline, and according to a Society Page article from 2 years ago, recently divorced. The timeline was interesting. Céline's relationship with Philippe had ended around the same time she'd moved from Montreal to Chicago and started working at Pinnacle. Had she come to Chicago to escape a failed relationship? Or was there more to the story? I kept digging, feeling like a detective in one of the mystery novels my book club read. I found Céline's Instagram account, which was more public than her Facebook. She posted frequently, photos of expensive meals, designer handbags, luxury hotels, first-class airplane seats. The lifestyle she displayed was extravagant. Too extravagant, I thought, for someone who'd only been working at Pinnacle for 18 months. Even with a good salary, the level of spending she showcased seemed excessive. Then I started noticing the dates. Many of her most lavish posts, the ones showing stays at 5-star hotels, designer shopping sprees, expensive jewelry, had been posted in the past 6 months. Right after she'd met Thomas. I sat back in my chair, a cold feeling settling in my stomach. Thomas made good money as an investment banker, but was it really enough to fund the lifestyle Céline was displaying? Or was there something else going on? The phone call. Around noon, my phone rang. It was Thomas. My first instinct was not to answer, to let it go to voicemail, to maintain some distance while I figured out what to do. But I'd never ignored my son's calls before, and I wasn't going to start now, no matter how hurt I was. "Hello, sweetheart," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "Mom, hi. I wanted to check in, see if you got home okay last night." "I did, thank you. The drive was fine." There was a pause. I could hear the discomfort in his silence. "Listen, Mom, about last night. I know Céline can be a bit intense sometimes. She's just particular about things. She didn't mean to make you uncomfortable." I gripped the phone tighter. He was making excuses for her. Already rewriting what had happened to make it more palatable. "Thomas," I said carefully, "do you think it was appropriate for her to ask me to do the dishes while you were both relaxing?" Another pause. "I didn't realize she'd asked you to do that. I was on that call with the Singapore client. If I'd known, would have said something." "Would you have?" "Of course, Mom. You know I would never want you to feel like." "Like what? Like a servant in your home? Like someone who's only useful for washing dishes and then can be dismissed?" "Mom, that's not fair." Céline was just being practical. The dishes needed to be done, and she'd just had her nails done. And I'm just the old mother who has nothing better to do than clean up after everyone? "I didn't say that." His voice had an edge now, defensive. "You're being oversensitive." Those words hit me like a slap. Oversensitive. The same dismissal I'd heard from my own father when I complained about being treated unfairly, from former bosses when I pointed out inequities at work, from my late husband when I asked for basic consideration. "Thomas, did Céline speak to you in French during dinner?" The pause was longer this time. "A little bit, yeah." "Why? What did she say?" "I don't know, Mom. Just comments about the food, the apartment. Nothing important." He was lying. Or at least, he was omitting the truth. My son, who used to tell me everything, was now actively deceiving me to protect his fiancée. "I see," I said quietly. "Mom, please don't make this into a bigger deal than it is. Céline is going to be part of our family. I need you two to get along." I was trying to get along, Thomas. I made the dessert you requested. I came to dinner. I washed your dishes. What more do you want from me? I want you to give her a chance. To not judge her so harshly. She comes from a different world than we do, and she's trying to adjust. A different world. As if being wealthy and educated gave her the right to treat people with contempt. Thomas, I'm not judging her. I'm asking you to see how she actually treats me. She treats you fine, Mom. You're just not used to her style. She's direct, she's sophisticated, she has high standards. That doesn't make her a bad person. We talked for a few more minutes, but the conversation went in circles. Thomas defending Céline, me trying to make him see what was really happening, both of us growing increasingly frustrated. When we finally hung up, I felt worse than before. Not only had the dinner been humiliating, but now Thomas was gaslighting me, telling me I was imagining problems, that I was being oversensitive and judgmental. This was worse than I'd thought. Céline hadn't just captured my son's heart. She'd captured his mind. Sunday afternoon. Sunday afternoon, I was working in my garden, pulling weeds, preparing the beds for winter, when my sister Dorothy called. How was dinner with Thomas and that woman? She asked without preamble. Dorothy had never liked Céline, not from the first time they'd met at the engagement party. I told her everything. The French insults, the dishwashing, Céline's final comment about preferring their life without me. Dorothy listened in growing outrage. That absolute witch, she said when I finished. And Thomas just let her talk to you like that? He didn't know what she was saying. She spoke in French, assuming I wouldn't understand. But you did understand. Every word. So what are you going to do about it? I pulled a stubborn weed from the soil and sat back on my heels. I don't know yet. But Dorothy, there's something else. I've been looking into Céline's background, and some things don't add up. I told her about the expensive lifestyle, the suspicious timing, the dramatic increase in luxury purchases after Céline met Thomas. You think she's a gold digger? Dorothy asked. I think she's spending a lot of money, and I'm not sure where it's all coming from. Have you talked to Thomas about it? How can I? He's already defensive about her. If I start making accusations about her finances, he'll think I'm just trying to break them up. Dorothy was quiet for a moment. Eleanor, you need to be careful here. If Thomas is serious about marrying this woman, and you push too hard against it, you might lose him completely. I'm already losing him, Dorothy. At least this way, I might protect him from making a terrible mistake. After we hung up, I went back to my computer. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something important I was missing, some piece of the puzzle that would explain everything. I started searching for public records. Marriage records, property records, court documents, anything that might give me more insight into Céline's past. That's when I found it. A lawsuit filed in Montreal Civil Court 2 years ago. Philippe Marchand versus Céline Beaumont. The case had been settled out of court, but the initial filing was public record. Philippe Marchand was suing Céline for breach of contract and fraud related to a business investment. According to the filing, Céline had convinced Philippe to invest $200,000 in a luxury boutique she claimed to be opening. The money had disappeared, the boutique had never materialized, and Philippe was seeking damages. The case had been settled confidentially 3 months after it was filed. No details of the settlement were public, but the fact that there had been a lawsuit at all was damning. My hands were shaking as I read through the court documents. Céline had a history of financial fraud. She'd scammed her previous boyfriend out of a significant sum of money. Was she doing the same thing to Thomas? Monday morning, I called Thomas's bank. It was a long shot, and I knew I was crossing ethical lines, but I had to know if my son was in financial danger. First National Bank, how may I help you? Yes, this is Eleanor Hartfield. I'm calling about my son Thomas Hartfield's accounts. I'm listed as his emergency contact, and I have some concerns about unusual activity. This was technically true. When Thomas had opened his first bank account at 16, I'd been listed as emergency contact. I was gambling that the information had never been updated. Let me pull up the account, the woman said. Can you verify the last 4 digits of his social security number? I provided the information, holding my breath. Okay, Mrs. Hartfield. What concerns did you have? I wanted to verify some recent large withdrawals or transfers. My son mentioned some unusual transactions, and I'm worried about potential fraud. There was typing on the other end. I'm showing the account information now. Are you asking about the savings account or the checking account? Both, please. Well, the checking account shows normal activity. Regular paycheck deposits, utility payments, that sort of thing. But there have been some significant transfers from the savings account in the past 6 months. My heart sank. How significant? I'm showing transfers totaling approximately $85,000 between May and October. $85,000. In 6 months. And where were these transfers going? To another account at First National, listed under the name Céline Beaumont. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. Thomas had given Céline $85,000 in 6 months. That was nearly his entire savings, the money he'd been carefully accumulating for years to eventually buy a house. Mrs. Hartfield? Are you still there? Yes, I'm here. Thank you for the information. I'll discuss this with Thomas. I hung up and sat in stunned silence. It all made sense now. The expensive lifestyle, the designer clothes, the luxury purchases. Céline wasn't funding her extravagant spending with her own salary. She was using Thomas's money. And based on her history with Philippe Marchand, this wasn't the first time she'd done this. The confrontation with Thomas. I called Thomas immediately, my hands shaking with rage and fear. Mom, I'm at work. Can this wait? No, it cannot wait. Thomas, I need to ask you something, and I need you to tell me the truth. Have you been giving Céline money? Silence on the other end. Thomas? That's none of your business, Mom. I'm making it my business. Have you been transferring large sums to her? How did you? He stopped himself. Have you been checking my bank accounts? I called the bank because I was worried about you. And it turns out I had good reason to be worried. You've given her $85,000 in 6 months, Thomas. That's nearly your entire savings. It's not giving, Mom. It's investing. Céline is starting a business, and I'm helping fund it. We're partners. What kind of business? A luxury consulting firm. She's going to help high-end clients with lifestyle management, event planning, that sort of thing. It's a great opportunity. My blood ran cold. This was exactly what she'd told Philippe Marchand, that she was starting a luxury boutique. And that money had disappeared too. Thomas, listen to me carefully. Céline has done this before. Done what before? Convinced a man to invest in a business that never materialized. There's a lawsuit on public record. Philippe Marchand, her ex-boyfriend in Montreal, sued her for fraud after she took $200,000 from him for a business that never happened. That's ridiculous. Céline told me about that. Philippe was bitter about their breakup and made false accusations. The case was dismissed. It wasn't dismissed, Thomas. It was settled out of court, which usually means the plaintiff had a legitimate case. Or it means it was cheaper to settle than to fight a frivolous lawsuit. Mom, I can't believe you're doing this. You're digging into Céline's past, calling my bank, making wild accusations. I'm trying to protect you. From what? From being happy? From having a life that doesn't revolve around you? The accusation stung like a physical blow. Thomas, this isn't about me. This is about Céline's pattern of behavior. First Philippe, now you. She takes money from men for business ventures that never happen. The business is happening, Mom. We have a business plan, incorporation papers, everything. You just can't accept that I'm serious about someone who isn't up to your standards. My standards? Thomas, I don't care if she's rich or poor, educated or not. I care that she's using you. I care that she treats me, and probably treats you, with contempt when you're not paying attention. That's not true. It is true. Thomas, at dinner on Friday, Céline spoke to you in French. Do you know what she said? Just comments about the food. She called me pathetic. She mocked my clothes, my jewelry, the way I eat. She said I was desperate for your attention and that it was embarrassing to watch. She said you were much more refined now than when you came from me. And when I was leaving, she said, in French, that I shouldn't come back because they prefer their life without me. The silence on the other end was deafening. You're lying, Thomas said finally, but his voice was uncertain. I'm not lying. Thomas, I speak French. Fluently. I worked as a translator for 15 years. I taught French literature at Oakwood Community College. I understood every single word she said. More silence. Why didn't you say anything? He asked quietly. Because I wanted to see how far she would go. I wanted to understand what was really happening. And now I know. Céline doesn't love you, Thomas. She loves your money. She's running a con, just like she did with Philippe, and you're falling for it. Get out. His voice was cold now, angry. Get out of my life, Mom. If you can't support my relationship, if all you can do is make accusations and try to sabotage my happiness, then I don't want you in my life. Thomas, please. I mean it. Don't call me. Don't come to the apartment. Don't contact me until you're ready to apologize to both me and Céline for these horrible accusations. I won't apologize for trying to protect you from someone who's stealing from you. Goodbye, Mom. The line went dead. I sat there holding my phone, staring at it in disbelief. My son had just cut me out of his life. Not because I'd done something wrong, but because I'd tried to save him from making a terrible mistake. The tears came then, hot and bitter. But underneath the tears was something else. A growing certainty that I was right about Céline, and a determination to prove it before she destroyed my son completely. Tuesday afternoon. The next afternoon, I did something I never thought I'd do. I hired a private investigator. His name was Marcus Chen, and he came recommended by Dorothy, who knew him through her husband's law office. Marcus was in his mid-40s, professional and discreet, with 20 years of experience investigating fraud cases. I met him at a coffee shop in downtown Chicago, far enough from Riverside that I wouldn't run into anyone I knew. Mrs. Hartfield, he said, shaking my hand and settling into the chair across from me. Your sister said you have concerns about your son's fiancée? I told him everything. The lawsuit with Philippe Marchand, the $85,000 Thomas had transferred to Céline, her expensive lifestyle that didn't match her stated income, and my gut feeling that something was very wrong. Marcus took notes, his expression professionally neutral. What exactly do you want me to find out? He asked when I finished. I want to know if she's scamming my son. I want to know where the money is going. I want to know if this business she claims to be starting actually exists or if it's just another story to extract money from him. That's reasonable. I can do a comprehensive background check, financial investigation, and surveillance if needed. But Mrs. Hartfield, I need to be honest with you. This kind of investigation takes time and it's expensive. Are you prepared for both? I thought about my own limited savings, the modest pension I lived on, the careful budget I maintained in retirement. How expensive? For a thorough investigation, you're looking at probably $5,000 to $10,000, depending on how deep we need to go and how long it takes. It was nearly half my yearly discretionary income. But what choice did I have? If I was right about Céline, Thomas was in serious danger. And if I was wrong, at least I'd know for certain and could try to repair our relationship. Do it, I said. Whatever it costs. I'll need a retainer of $3,000 to start. I'll keep you updated on expenses as we go. I wrote him a check, my hand trembling slightly. This was money I'd been saving for a new roof on my cottage, for the repairs my car desperately needed, for the small emergencies that came with being 70 and living on a fixed income. But my son was worth more than a new roof. One more thing, Marcus said as we stood to leave. Your son told you not to contact him, correct? Yes. Then you need to stay away from him and his fiancée while I'm investigating. If they catch you following them or digging into their business, it could compromise the investigation and make things worse between you and your son. I nodded, though the idea of staying away from Thomas, especially now when he might be in danger, felt like asking me to stop breathing. I'll stay away, I said. But please, work fast. I have a bad feeling about this woman, and I don't think we have much time. Wednesday evening. Wednesday evening, I was making dinner, just a simple soup, since I had no appetite and no one to cook for, when my phone rang with an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Mrs. Hartfield? A woman's voice, accented, unfamiliar. Yes? My name is Isabelle Marchand. I'm calling from Montreal. You don't know me, but I believe you're acquainted with Céline Beaumont? My heart started racing. Yes, I know her. Who are you? I'm Philippe Marchand's sister. My brother is the man who sued Céline 2 years ago. I sank into a kitchen chair. How did you get my number? I've been monitoring Céline's social media. When I saw she was engaged to someone in Chicago, I did some research and found your name listed as Thomas Hartfield's emergency contact on some public records. I hope you don't mind me calling, but I felt I had to warn you. Warn me about what? Isabelle sighed. About what Céline did to my brother. The lawsuit is public record, but what's not public is how badly she destroyed him. Philippe gave her $200,000 for a business that never existed. But it wasn't just the money, Mrs. Hartfield. She isolated him from his family, convinced him we were trying to sabotage their relationship. She moved into his home, took over his finances, and systematically drained his accounts while making him believe she loved him. This sounded horribly familiar. What happened after the lawsuit? We settled because Philippe couldn't bear to drag it out in court. She'd kept just enough documentation to make it look legitimate, business plans, incorporation papers, bank accounts. But nothing ever came of it. The money disappeared into various accounts and purchases, and the business never launched. Is your brother okay now? Financially, yes. He recovered. But emotionally? He's still struggling. The betrayal nearly broke him. And Mrs. Hartfield, the worst part is, we tried to warn him. His friends tried to warn him. But Céline had convinced him that everyone was jealous, that we couldn't stand to see him happy. By the time he realized what she really was, it was almost too late. I felt tears prick my eyes. This was exactly what was happening to Thomas. Why are you calling me? I asked. Because I saw your son's social media posts about the engagement. He seems happy, in love, trusting. Just like Philippe was. And I couldn't stand by and watch Céline do this to another family without at least trying to warn them. I've already tried warning my son. He won't listen. He's cut me out of his life for questioning her. I know, Isabelle said sadly. That's what she does. She isolates them, makes them choose between her and everyone who might see through her act. But Mrs. Hartfield, you can't give up. Keep documenting what you find. Keep building your case. Because eventually, he'll realize what she is, and when he does, he'll need you. We talked for another 20 minutes. Isabelle gave me details about Philippe's experience, names of other people in Montreal who'd had dealings with Céline, suggestions for what to look into. By the time we hung up, I had filled 3 pages with notes and my resolve had hardened into steel. Céline Beaumont had made a career out of deceiving men and taking their money. She'd done it to Philippe. She was doing it to Thomas. And I was going to make sure she didn't get away with it this time. Friday afternoon. On Friday afternoon, Marcus Chin called with his first report. Mrs. Hartfield, I've completed the initial background check, and you were right to be concerned. What did you find? First, the business Céline claims to be starting, Beaumont Luxury Consulting, does exist on paper. She filed incorporation documents in Illinois 3 months ago. But that's where the legitimate business activity ends. There's no office space leased, no business license, no employees, no website, no marketing materials. It's a shell company. My stomach tightened. Where's the money going? That's where it gets interesting. The $85,000 your son transferred went into a business account for Beaumont Luxury Consulting. But within days of each transfer, the money was moved again, into personal accounts, into cryptocurrency investments, into luxury purchases. I've documented transfers to high-end retailers, jewelry stores, a lease payment for a Mercedes, and about $30,000 that was wired to an account in the Cayman Islands. The Cayman Islands? Why? Offshore accounts are often used to hide money from taxes or creditors. It's a red flag for financial fraud. Can you trace where that money went after it reached the Cayman account? Not easily. That's part of why people use offshore banking, privacy. But the fact that she's moving money offshore while supposedly investing it in a Chicago-based business tells us this isn't legitimate. What else did you find? Céline has significant debt. Credit cards maxed out, personal loans from 3 different institutions, and she's behind on payments to several creditors. Her credit score is in the low 500s, terrible. She's living far beyond her means, and she has been for years. But she works for Pinnacle Advisory. She must make a good salary. She does. About $120,000 a year. But she spends nearly triple that. The math doesn't work unless she's getting money from somewhere else. From men like Thomas. Exactly. And Mrs. Hartfield, there's one more thing. I found evidence of 2 other relationships in the past 5 years, both with wealthy men, both ending with lawsuits or threats of legal action, both settled quietly. Philippe Marchand was just the most recent before your son. I closed my eyes, feeling sick. Céline was a professional con artist, and Thomas was just her latest mark. What should I do? I asked. Gather documentation. I'll send you everything I've found. Then you need to decide whether to try talking to your son again or whether to pursue legal action. Legal action? If your son gave her this money under false pretenses, believing it was a business investment when it was actually personal use, that's fraud. You could potentially sue on his behalf or report it to the authorities. But that would require Thomas's cooperation, wouldn't it? Ideally, yes. Though if the fraud is clear enough, authorities might investigate anyway. After we hung up, I sat with Marcus's report spread across my kitchen table. Bank statements, incorporation documents, credit reports, evidence of Céline's pattern of fraud stretching back years. I had everything I needed to prove she was scamming Thomas. Everything except my son's willingness to believe it. The question was, what did I do now? Did I try again to reach Thomas, armed with this concrete evidence? Did I go to the authorities? Did I confront Céline directly? Or did I wait and watch while the woman I'd raised my son to trust destroyed him financially and emotionally? As the sun set over Riverside and shadows filled my kitchen, I made my decision. I wasn't going to wait. I wasn't going to be passive. And I wasn't going to let Céline Beaumont ruin my son's life without a fight. It was time to take action. But first, I needed to understand one more thing. What was Céline's endgame? Was she planning to marry Thomas and continue bleeding him dry? Or was there something else, some final con I hadn't seen yet? To find that out, I was going to have to do something risky. I was going to have to talk to Céline Beaumont face to face. And this time, she was going to know exactly who she was dealing with. The following Monday morning, I did something I hadn't done in months. I got dressed in my best outfit, put on my grandmother's pearls, and drove into the city with a clear purpose. I was going to Céline's workplace. Marcus had given me her schedule. Every Monday at 11 a.m., Céline had lunch at Bistro Moderne, a trendy French restaurant 2 blocks from her office at Pinnacle Advisory Group. She went alone, usually working through lunch on her laptop while sipping expensive wine. I arrived at the restaurant at 10:45 and asked for a table near the window. The hostess, a young woman with a pleasant smile, seated me at a small table with a clear view of the entrance. I ordered coffee and waited. At exactly 11 o'clock, Céline walked in. She was dressed in a charcoal gray power suit that probably cost more than my monthly pension, her hair pulled back in her signature sleek style, designer sunglasses perched on top of her head. She walked with that same confident stride I'd seen at Thomas's apartment, the walk of someone who believed the world existed to serve her. She didn't notice me at first. She was too busy checking her phone as the hostess led her to her usual table near the back. I watched as she settled in, ordered without looking at the menu, and opened her laptop with the air of someone preparing for a productive working lunch. I picked up my coffee cup and walked over to her table. "Hello, Céline." She looked up, her expression shifting rapidly from confusion to recognition to barely concealed annoyance. "Eleanor. She didn't invite me to sit. What are you doing here?" "I came to talk to you. We need to have a conversation, just the two of us. I don't think Thomas would appreciate you ambushing me at lunch. Thomas doesn't know I'm here. And that's probably for the best, considering what we're going to discuss." Something flickered in Celine's eyes. Was it concern? Fear? She covered it quickly with her usual cool demeanor. "I'm quite busy, Eleanor. Perhaps another time. Now." I pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. "We're going to talk now, Céline. Unless you prefer to have this conversation in a more public forum. Perhaps with the authorities present." That got her attention. She closed her laptop slowly, her manicured fingers resting on the lid. "I don't know what you think you're doing." Sais exactement cekje face. "I know exactly what I'm doing." I switched to French, watching her face carefully. Sais exactement que vous faites aussi. "And I know exactly what you're doing too." Celine's face went completely white. Her mouth opened slightly, then closed. For the first time since I'd met her, she looked genuinely shocked. Tu parles français? You speak French?" she stammered. "Couramment. Fluently." I leaned forward, keeping my voice low but hard. "J'ai tout compris ce soir-là. Chaque insult. Chaque commentaire cruel. Chaque motk tu as dit en pensant que j'étais trop stupide pour comprendre." I understood everything that night. Every insult. Every cruel comment. Every word you said thinking I was too stupid to understand. Céline recovered quickly, her composure sliding back into place like armor. "So you speak French. Felicitations. That doesn't change anything." "It changes everything," I said, switching back to English. "Because it means I know exactly who you are, Céline. I know what you said about me. I know how you manipulated my son. And I know about your little business venture. Thomas invested in my company of his own free will. Thomas gave you $85,000 for a shell company that exists only on paper. Money that you immediately moved into personal accounts, luxury purchases, and an offshore account in the Cayman Islands." The color drained from her face again. "You have no right to investigate my finances. I have every right when those finances involve money stolen from my son. And yes, Céline, it is stolen. Taking money under false pretenses is called fraud." She leaned back in her chair, studying me with new eyes. I could see her reassessing me, recalculating, trying to figure out her next move. "What do you want?" she asked finally. "I want you to leave Thomas alone. I want you to return the money you've taken from him. And I want you out of his life." Céline laughed, a cold sound. "You think it's that simple? Thomas loves me, Eleanor. He proposed to me. We're getting married in 4 months. You can't just make me disappear because you don't approve. I can if I go to the police with evidence of fraud. And what evidence do you think you have?" I reached into my purse and pulled out a folder, a copy of everything Marcus had gathered. Bank statements showing the transfers from Thomas to her, evidence of the shell company, documentation of her previous lawsuits with Philippe Marchand and the others, her credit reports showing massive debt. I spread it across the table between us. I have everything, Céline. Your entire pattern, documented and verified. You've been running this con for years. Different cities, different men, same scheme. And this time, you're not going to get away with it. Céline stared at the documents, her expression unreadable. Then, slowly, she started to smile. You know what's funny, Eleanor? Even if you show all of this to Thomas, he won't believe you. He'll think you fabricated it, that you're so desperate to break us up that you hired someone to create fake evidence. I've already told him you're obsessed with controlling his life. Have you told him about Philippe Marchand? About the $200,000 you took from him? I told him that Philippe was bitter about our breakup and made false accusations. That the case was settled because his claims were baseless. Thomas believes me. What about the other men? The pattern of lawsuits and settlements? Bad luck and vindictive exes. Thomas feels sorry for me, actually. He thinks I've been unfairly targeted because I'm a successful woman who doesn't fit into traditional roles. I felt my anger rising but kept my voice steady. You're very good at this. I'll give you that. You've perfected the art of playing the victim while you're actually the predator. I prefer to think of it as being smart enough to take advantage of opportunities, Céline said. Your son has money he doesn't know what to do with. I'm helping him invest it in something meaningful, our future together. You mean your future? There is no our in this equation. You're using him. And he's using me, Céline countered. He gets a beautiful, sophisticated wife who makes him look good at business functions and in social circles. I get financial security. It's a fair exchange. That's not love. Love is a fairy tale, Eleanor. What Thomas and I have is much more practical. A mutually beneficial arrangement. Does he know it's just an arrangement? Or does he think you actually care about him? Céline picked up her wine glass, taking a slow sip. What Thomas thinks is his business. The point is, he's happy with me. Happier than he ever was living his small, ordinary life before we met. You've isolated him from everyone who cares about him. That's not happiness, that's control. I've helped him see that his previous life was limiting him. His mediocre friends, his ordinary ambitions, his clingy mother who wanted to keep him in the suburbs forever. I've elevated him. The casual cruelty in her words took my breath away. This woman felt no remorse, no guilt, no hesitation about destroying my relationship with my son. What happens when the money runs out? I asked. When Thomas realizes you've drained his savings and there's nothing left to take. By then, we'll be married. And divorce settlements can be quite generous, especially if I have the right lawyer. She smiled. But ideally, I'll be pregnant by then. Child support lasts 18 years, and Thomas would never abandon his own child. I felt physically sick. She had it all planned out, the marriage, the pregnancy, the eventual divorce and financial settlement. Thomas wasn't a partner to her. He was a long-term investment. You're a monster, I said quietly. I'm a realist, Céline corrected. The world doesn't reward nice women, Eleanor. It rewards smart ones. Women who understand that marriage is an economic institution and learn to use it to their advantage. Is that what you tell yourself to sleep at night? That you're just being smart instead of being cruel? I sleep very well, actually. In a penthouse apartment with Egyptian cotton sheets and a view of the Chicago skyline. How do you sleep, Eleanor? In your little cottage with your cat and your memories of better days? The insult was designed to wound, but I didn't let her see how much it hurt. I sleep knowing I've never lied to anyone I claimed to love. I sleep knowing I built my life honestly, without stealing from people who trusted me. How noble. Céline's voice dripped with sarcasm. And how has that nobility worked out for you? You're 70 years old, living on a pension, driving a car that's probably older than my relationship with Thomas. Meanwhile, I'm 33 and living the life you probably dreamed about when you were my age. I dreamed about having integrity. I dreamed about raising a good man who would treat people with kindness and respect. And I achieved those dreams until you came along. Then I guess I'm the nightmare that woke you up to reality. We stared at each other across the table, the folder of evidence sitting between us like a loaded weapon. Finally, I asked the question that had been haunting me since I discovered the truth about her. Why Thomas? Out of all the men in Chicago, all the wealthy targets you could have chosen, why my son? Céline considered the question, tilting her head slightly. Honestly? Because he was easy. Recently divorced, lonely, desperate for connection. He practically threw himself at me at that conference in Montreal. And when I looked into his background, investment banker, good salary, savings account, no children, mother who lived far enough away to be easily managed, he checked all the boxes. Easily managed, I repeated. Is that what you thought I would be? At first, yes. The elderly mother in the suburbs who'd be grateful for any attention from her son's new girlfriend. I underestimated you, I'll admit that. Most women your age are too intimidated by someone like me to cause problems. Someone like you. You mean a fraud? I mean someone young, beautiful, and sophisticated. Someone who represents everything they're not anymore. Céline leaned forward. But here's what you need to understand, Eleanor. Even knowing everything you know, even with all your little evidence folders and private investigators, you can't win. Thomas has chosen me. He's cut you out of his life to protect me. And if you try to come between us with these accusations, you'll only drive him further away. So what do you suggest I do? Stand by and watch you destroy him? I suggest you accept reality. Thomas is an adult. He's made his choice. And that choice is me, not you. Your time as the most important woman in his life is over. And when you've taken everything from him? When you've drained his accounts and moved on to the next victim? What then? Céline shrugged. Then he'll have learned an expensive lesson about being more careful who he trusts. But that's not your problem anymore, is it? You're not his mother, you're just the old woman he used to know before he found someone better. The words hung in the air between us, cruel and calculated. Céline was showing me exactly who she was, not because she was scared of being exposed, but because she knew she'd already won. Or at least, she thought she had. I picked up the folder and put it back in my purse. You're right about one thing, I said. Thomas is an adult, and he's made his choice. I can't force him to see what you really are. Céline smiled, triumphant. Finally, you understand. But I can make sure that when he does figure it out, and he will, Céline, because people like you always make mistakes eventually, I'll be there with proof of everything you've done. Every dollar you took, every lie you told, every moment you manipulated him. That's a nice fantasy, Eleanor. But by the time Thomas realizes anything, if he ever does, it will be too late. The money will be gone, the relationship will be over, and I'll be living somewhere warm with someone new. She picked up her wine glass again. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have actual work to do. Unlike you, I have a career and a life beyond obsessing over my son's romantic choices. I stood up slowly, gathering my purse and coat. One more thing, Céline. That dinner at Thomas's apartment, when you spoke French thinking I wouldn't understand, you made a mistake. You showed me who you really are. And now I know exactly what I'm fighting against. Good luck with that fight, Céline said dismissively, already opening her laptop again. You're going to need it. I walked out of the restaurant with my head held high, even though my heart was pounding and my hands were shaking. The confrontation hadn't gone the way I'd hoped. Céline wasn't scared. She wasn't backing down. She was confident, calculating, and utterly convinced she'd already won. But as I drove back to Riverside, I realized something important. Céline had made a critical error in that conversation. She'd admitted everything. She'd confirmed she was using Thomas for money. She'd acknowledged her pattern of targeting wealthy men. She'd revealed her plans for marriage, pregnancy, and eventual divorce settlement. And I'd recorded every word of it. The small recording device Marcus had given me, hidden in my purse, had captured the entire conversation. In Illinois, single-party consent recording was legal. I didn't need Celine's permission to record a conversation I was part of. Now I had something even better than documentation of financial fraud. I had Celine's own words, in her own voice, admitting to everything. The question was, what did I do with it? Tuesday morning, the decision. I spent Tuesday morning listening to the recording over and over, Celine's cold, calculating voice filling my small kitchen as I made notes of the most damning sections. Thomas is an investment. Marriage is an economic institution. By the time Thomas realizes anything, if he ever does, it will be too late. Each phrase was worse than the last, painting a picture of a woman who saw my son as nothing more than a source of money to be exploited and discarded. Around 10 a.m., Marcus called. Mrs. Hartfield, I've completed the deeper financial investigation. The news isn't good. Tell me. In addition to the $85,000 we already documented, I found evidence of additional transfers. Céline has been accessing Thomas's accounts more directly. She has his credit card information, his online banking passwords. In the past 2 weeks alone, she's made $15,000 worth of purchases on his credit cards. Can he see these charges? He should be able to, but here's the thing, she's been intercepting his mail. I confirmed with his building's mailroom that Céline added herself as an authorized mail recipient. She's collecting his bank statements and credit card bills before he sees them. So he has no idea how much money he's actually losing. Exactly. And there's more. She's been meeting with a real estate agent about buying a vacation property in Florida. A $600,000 condo. She's been discussing financing options that would require Thomas to co-sign. My stomach dropped. She's going to trap him with more debt. That's my assessment. Once they're married and he co-signs for major purchases, he'll be legally responsible for debts she's incurring. Even if he discovers the truth later, he'll be stuck paying for properties and loans he didn't want. This is worse than I thought. Mrs. Hartfield, I think it's time to go to the authorities. What Céline is doing goes beyond civil fraud. This is identity theft, financial exploitation, potentially wire fraud if she's moving money interstate or internationally. These are criminal charges. But Thomas has to be willing to press charges, doesn't he? Not necessarily. If the fraud is clear enough, the district attorney can pursue charges even without the victim's cooperation. It's less common, but it happens in cases of elder abuse or when the victim is clearly under the influence of the perpetrator. Thomas isn't elderly. No, but he's clearly being manipulated. The combination of isolation from family, sudden large financial transfers, and the perpetrator's documented history of similar scams might be enough to interest a prosecutor. I thought about it. Going to the authorities would mean publicly exposing what was happening. It would mean newspapers, possibly television coverage, humiliation for Thomas. Even if it stopped Céline, it might destroy my relationship with my son permanently. But the alternative was watching Céline trap him in hundreds of thousands of dollars of debt, drain him completely, and disappear, leaving Thomas financially and emotionally devastated. What if I tried one more time to reach Thomas? I asked. What if I played him the recording? You could try, Marcus said carefully. But Mrs. Hartfield, in my experience, victims of this type of con are extremely resistant to accepting the truth. Céline has probably spent months conditioning him to dismiss anything negative you say about her. The recording might help, but it might also backfire if he thinks you somehow manipulated or fabricated it. So you're saying I should go to the police? I'm saying you need to do something soon. Based on the real estate meetings and the escalating financial activity, I think Céline is preparing for an end game. She's going to push for major financial commitments in the next few months, trap Thomas with debt, then either stay married long enough to get pregnant or find a reason to divorce him and take a settlement. Either way, she's accelerating. After we hung up, I sat with the weight of the decision pressing down on me. Go to the police and potentially save Thomas's financial future but destroy our relationship? Or try once more to reach him myself, knowing it would probably fail? I was still wrestling with the decision when my doorbell rang. The unexpected visitor. I opened the door to find a woman I'd never seen before standing on my porch. She was in her late 30s, professionally dressed, with kind eyes and an uncertain smile. Mrs. Hartfield? Eleanor Hartfield? Yes. My name is Jennifer Morrison. I was Thomas's wife. His ex-wife. My heart skipped a beat. Jennifer. Thomas's first wife, the woman he divorced 3 years ago. I'd always liked Jennifer. She'd been kind and down to earth, and I'd been sad when their marriage ended, even though it had been amicable. Jennifer, please, come in. I stepped aside, ushering her into my living room. What brings you here? Is everything all right? Jennifer sat on my couch, clutching her purse nervously. I'm not sure how to say this, so I'm just going to be direct. I saw Thomas's engagement announcement on social media a few months ago. I was happy for him at first. Then I started seeing photos of his fiancée. Céline Beaumont. Yes. And Eleanor, I recognized her. The room seemed to tilt slightly. What do you mean, you recognized her? Her name wasn't Céline Beaumont when I knew her. It was Céline Beauchamp. No T at the end of Beaumont. She was going by a slightly different version of her name. But it's definitely the same woman. Where did you know her from? Jennifer took a deep breath. Do you remember my brother, David? He was at our wedding, tall, worked in finance. I had a vague memory of Thomas's former brother-in-law. Yes, I think so. David met a woman about 4 years ago, right before Thomas and I got divorced. She was from Montreal, worked in consulting, seemed sophisticated and charming. Her name was Céline Beauchamp. They dated for about 8 months. My blood ran cold. What happened? She convinced David to invest in a business venture, something about importing French luxury goods. He gave her $120,000. The business never happened. The money disappeared. David tried to get it back, threatened legal action, but she'd structured everything just carefully enough that his lawyers said it would be hard to prove fraud in court. He eventually gave up rather than spend more money on legal fees. Did he report it to the police? He filed a report, but nothing came of it. She'd moved to a different state by then, and the local police said it was a civil matter, not criminal. And you think this Céline Beauchamp and Thomas's fiancée Céline Beaumont are the same person? I'm certain of it. Same face, same accent, same background story about living in Paris, even the same mannerisms. When I saw Thomas's engagement photos, I felt sick. I knew I had to warn someone. Why didn't you call Thomas directly? Jennifer looked uncomfortable. Thomas and I haven't spoken since the divorce. It ended amicably, but we agreed to a clean break. If I called him now and tried to tell him his fiancée was a con artist who scammed my brother, he'd think I was jealous or bitter. But I thought maybe you could reach him. You're his mother. I let out a bitter laugh. Thomas and I aren't speaking either. He cut me out of his life for questioning Céline. Oh no. Jennifer's face fell. Then she's already isolated him from you. That's what she did to David. She gradually convinced him that his family and friends were jealous of their relationship, that they couldn't be happy for his success. By the time he realized what she was doing, he'd pushed everyone away. How is David now? Financially recovered, but it took years. Emotionally, he's still struggling to trust people. The betrayal did something to him. And Eleanor, David is a smart man. A financial analyst. But she still managed to fool him completely. If it can happen to him, it can happen to anyone. We sat in silence for a moment, two women who both loved Thomas in different ways, both helpless to protect him from someone who was systematically destroying him. I have evidence, I said finally. Financial records, a recording of Céline admitting to using Thomas for money, documentation of her pattern with other men. I've been trying to decide whether to go to the police. You should, Jennifer said immediately. Eleanor, I've watched this happen to my brother. If you don't stop her now, Thomas will lose everything, his money, his self-respect, years of his life. Please, don't let her do to him what she did to David. But if I go to the authorities, Thomas will hate me. He'll think I'm trying to control his life, that I can't let him be happy. He'll hate you temporarily, Jennifer said gently. But eventually, he'll realize you saved him. And if he doesn't, at least you'll know you tried. You'll know you did everything you could to protect your son. After Jennifer left, I sat alone in my living room as afternoon shadows grew long across the floor. I thought about Thomas as a little boy, how he'd run to me when he was scared, how he'd trusted me to protect him from everything that might hurt him. That little boy was gone, replaced by a man who thought he didn't need protection anymore. But the threat was just as real, just as dangerous. More dangerous, actually, because this time it wore a beautiful face and spoke with a charming accent. I picked up my phone and called Marcus Chen. Marcus, I've made my decision. I want to go to the police. Today. Are you sure? I'm sure. Set up the meeting. I'll bring everything we have. Mrs. Hartfield, you should know, once we do this, there's no taking it back. The investigation will become public. Thomas will find out, and he'll know you initiated it. I know. But I've spent too many years protecting Thomas's feelings at the expense of his well-being. This time, I'm going to protect him whether he likes it or not. I'll make the calls. Can you be at the district attorney's office at 3 p.m.? I looked at the clock. It was 1:30. I'll be there. The district attorney's office. The Cook County District Attorney's Office was located in an imposing government building downtown. I arrived at 2:45, clutching my folder of evidence and the recording device, my hands shaking despite my determination. Marcus met me in the lobby. Eleanor, this is Assistant District Attorney Robert Simmons. He's agreed to hear what we have. Robert Simmons was in his early 50s, with gray hair and sharp, intelligent eyes. He shook my hand firmly and led us to a conference room. Mrs. Hartfield, Mr. Chen has given me a brief overview of your situation. Why don't you start from the beginning and tell me everything? I did. I told him about meeting Céline, about the dinner where she insulted me in French, about discovering the financial transfers and the shell company. I told him about Philippe Marchand's lawsuit, about the other victims Marcus had uncovered, about Jennifer's brother David. I played him the recording of my conversation with Céline at the restaurant, watching his expression grow harder as he heard her cold, calculated words. When I finished, he sat back in his chair, studying the documents spread across the table. This is compelling, he said finally. The pattern is clear, the victim testimony is strong, and having her own admission on tape is significant. But I need to be honest with you, Mrs. Hartfield. Cases like this are difficult to prosecute. Why? Because the money was given voluntarily. Your son wrote the checks himself. He signed the transfer authorizations. Legally, that makes it a civil matter, breach of contract, maybe, but not necessarily criminal fraud. But she lied about what the money was for. She created a business entity. She has documentation showing a legitimate business purpose. A defense attorney would argue that the business simply failed, which isn't a crime. It's a risk of any investment. What about the other victims? The pattern? The pattern helps establish intent, but each case was settled or dropped. Philippe Marchand's lawsuit was settled out of court with a confidentiality agreement, which means he probably can't testify about the details. David Morrison never pursued legal action beyond an initial police report that went nowhere. I felt my hope deflating. So you're saying there's nothing we can do? I'm saying criminal prosecution would be difficult. But there might be another approach. He leaned forward. Has your son given Ms. Beaumont power of attorney over any of his accounts? I don't know. How would I find out? With his bank records. If she has legal authority to access his accounts and make decisions about his money, and if she's using that authority contrary to his interests, that could constitute financial exploitation. It's still difficult to prove, but it's a stronger criminal case. Marcus spoke up. I can try to determine if there are any power of attorney documents. It would require accessing more of Thomas's financial records. Do it, Robert said. And Mrs. Hartfield, I need you to understand something. Even if we can't bring criminal charges, there are other options. Civil court, restraining orders based on harassment or fraud, working with Thomas's bank to freeze suspicious transactions. We have tools, even if criminal prosecution isn't one of them. But that all requires Thomas's cooperation, I said quietly. And he's not going to cooperate. He's chosen her over everyone who's trying to warn him. Then we need to break through that resistance, Robert said. Sometimes victims of financial exploitation don't realize what's happening until they see it all laid out clearly, the pattern, the evidence, the admission. Your recording is powerful, Mrs. Hartfield. If your son hears Céline talking about him as an investment, describing their relationship as a business arrangement, it might be enough to wake him up. And if it's not? Robert was quiet for a moment. Then we document everything, we build the strongest case possible, and we wait. Because eventually, people like Céline Beaumont make mistakes. They get greedy, they get careless, they push too far. And when that happens, we'll be ready. I left the district attorney's office with mixed feelings. We had a plan. Marcus would investigate further, Robert would review everything we had, and we'd look for any angle that might lead to criminal charges. But the harsh reality was that unless Thomas woke up to what was happening, our options were limited. As I drove home to Riverside, I made one final decision. I was going to try one more time to reach my son. Not with accusations or evidence or recordings, those hadn't worked. This time, I was going to appeal to the little boy who used to trust me completely, who used to believe I would never steer him wrong. This time, I was going to tell him I loved him, that I would always be there for him, and that when he was ready to see the truth, I would help him find his way back. And if he still chose Céline after that? Then I would know I'd done everything I could. I would know that some lessons can only be learned the hard way, no matter how much we want to protect the people we love. But I wasn't giving up. Not yet. Not ever.